The blade pressed cold against her throat before she even saw his face. "Scream," the Duke of Blackridge said quietly, "and I'll know you're already broken." Elara Whitcomb didn't scream. She met his eyes in the darkness of her wedding chamber and whispered back, "Try to break me, and I'll know you're already afraid." The knife stilled. Something shifted in the shadows. This is the story of a woman sold like livestock, a man carved from war and winter, and the night everything they thought they knew about power went up in flames. Stay with me until the end. Like this video and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The carriage wheels hit another rut, and Elara's head cracked against the window frame for the third time in an hour. She didn't bother steadying herself anymore. Pain was becoming familiar, and there was a strange comfort in that. Outside, the landscape had turned hostile. The rolling green hills of her father's estate, former estate, she corrected herself bitterly, had given way to something darker. Twisted trees clawed at a sky the color of old bruises. Mist clung to everything like it was trying to smother the world. Perfect weather for a funeral. Or a wedding. Apparently there wasn't much difference. "We'll arrive within the hour, miss." The driver's voice filtered through the cabin, gruff and apologetic. He'd tried making conversation for the first 2 hours of the journey. Elara had pretended to sleep until he gave up. She didn't answer now either. What was there to say? Thank you for delivering me to my prison? Lovely weather for selling your daughter? Her fingers found the letter in her pocket, the one her father had left on her bed 3 days ago. She'd read it so many times the creases were starting to tear. Dearest Elara, by the time you read this, the arrangements will be finalized. The Duke of Blackridge has agreed to settle our debts in exchange for your hand. I know this is not the match you dreamed of, but dreams are luxuries we can no longer afford. Be obedient, be grateful, be silent. Your compliance is the only gift you can give this family now. Your father. Be obedient, be grateful, be silent. The 3 commandments of disappointing men everywhere. Elara crumpled the letter and let it drop to the carriage floor. She'd spent the first night crying, the second night raging, and the third night planning. Not an escape. She wasn't stupid enough to think she could outrun the Duke's reach or her father's debts. But she could plan how to survive, how to endure, how to make sure that whatever happened in that stone fortress ahead, she wouldn't disappear completely. The carriage lurched to a stop. "Blackridge Manor, miss." Elara's heart kicked against her ribs. Through the rain-streaked window, she could make out the estate rising from the mist like something born from a nightmare. It wasn't a house. It was a fortress. Black stone walls climbed toward the sky, crowned with turrets that looked sharp enough to draw blood from the clouds. No warm lights glowed in the windows. No gardens softened the harsh lines, just stone and shadow and the kind of silence that made you check over your shoulder. The driver opened her door, water dripping from his hat brim. "I'll get your trunks, miss." "Don't bother." Elara stepped down into the mud, her traveling dress immediately soaking up the filth. "I imagine I won't be here long enough to need them." The driver's expression flickered, something between pity and relief that he wasn't the one walking through those doors. "Right then. Best of luck, miss." He was back on the carriage before she could respond, wheels spinning in the mud as he escaped back toward civilization. Coward. But then again, so was her father. So were the servants who'd looked away when she'd been bundled into that carriage at dawn. Cowardice was apparently contagious, and she was standing at the epicenter of the outbreak. The manor's front doors were 15 feet tall and made of wood so dark it looked black. Iron hinges the size of her forearm held them in place. As she approached, they swung open with a groan that sounded almost alive. A woman stood in the entrance, tall, thin, dressed in black with her gray hair pulled back so severely it looked painful. Her face could have been carved from the same stone as the manor, cold, sharp, unyielding. "Miss Whitcomb." Not a question, not a greeting. Just a statement of fact delivered with all the warmth of a coroner identifying a body. "I am Mrs. Thorne, the head housekeeper. Follow me." "Is the Duke—" "His Grace will see you when he chooses." Mrs. Thorne turned and walked into the darkness without checking if Elara followed. Elara's jaw clenched. She was wet, exhausted, terrified, and rapidly running out of the composure she'd been hoarding for the past 3 days. But she forced her feet to move, following the housekeeper into the belly of the beast. The interior was exactly as welcoming as the exterior. Dark wood paneling absorbed what little light came from the scattered candles. Portraits lined the walls, generations of severe-looking men and women who all seemed to share the same expression: contempt. The air smelled like old smoke and older secrets. "The East Wing is off limits," Mrs. Thorne said without slowing. "The Duke's study is in the West Wing and is not to be entered without explicit permission. Meals are served at 7, noon, and 6. If you're late, you don't eat. The servants answer to me, not to you. If you need something, you ask me. If I deem it necessary, it will be provided." "And if I deem something necessary?" Mrs. Thorne stopped so abruptly that Elara nearly ran into her. The housekeeper turned, and for the first time her expression shifted from cold indifference to something sharper. "You are here as the Duke's wife. That is a title, Miss Whitcomb, not a position of authority. You will have a room, an allowance for clothing, and the courtesy due your rank. What you will not have is free reign of this household. Do we understand each other?" Every instinct Elara had screamed at her to back down, to nod, to be obedient, grateful, silent. She met Mrs. Thorne's eyes and held them. "I understand that you've made your position clear. Whether I accept it is another matter entirely." The silence that followed could have cut glass. Then Mrs. Thorne's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but something in the same family. "Your rooms are this way." They climbed 2 flights of stairs, wide at the bottom, narrower at the top, and emerged into a corridor lined with closed doors. Mrs. Thorne stopped at the 3rd one on the left and pushed it open. "The Duchess's chambers. You'll find everything you need. Your trunks will be brought up within the hour." She paused in the doorway. "The wedding is tomorrow at sunset. The Duke has arranged for a seamstress to attend you in the morning. I suggest you rest." "When do I meet him?" "His Grace keeps his own schedule." That's not an answer. Mrs. Thorne's expression could have frozen water. "It's the only one you'll get." The door closed with a decisive click. Elara stood in the center of the room, dripping mud and rainwater onto an expensive-looking rug, and tried very hard not to scream. The chambers were beautiful in the way a mausoleum might be beautiful. High ceilings, heavy furniture, windows that looked out over the storm-lashed grounds. A 4-poster bed dominated one wall, its curtains drawn back to reveal pristine white linens that looked like they'd never been touched. Everything was perfect, expensive, and completely devoid of warmth. A prison cell, she thought, just one with better furniture. She peeled off her wet dress and left it in a heap by the door. The wash basin held clean water, and she scrubbed the mud from her skin with a cloth that was probably worth more than her entire childhood wardrobe. Then she wrapped herself in a dressing gown that had been laid out on the bed and sat by the window, watching the rain. Tomorrow she would marry a man she'd never met. A man rumored to be ruthless, cold, untouchable. A man who'd bought her like one might buy a horse or a piece of land. Her father's letter had said the Duke of Blackridge was a war hero, that he'd served the crown with distinction, that his title and lands were beyond reproach, his bloodline impeccable, all the things that mattered to men who measured worth in property and titles. But the rumors said other things. They said he'd killed men with his bare hands during the war, that he'd returned from battle changed, harder, colder, something vital carved out and left on a foreign battlefield, that servants who displeased him disappeared, that his first wife had died under mysterious circumstances, though Elara's father had dismissed that as gossip from jealous rivals. She watched lightning split the sky and wondered which version was true. Probably both. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. "Come in." A young maid entered, barely 16, carrying Elara's trunks with visible effort. She set them down and bobbed a quick curtsy, her eyes fixed on the floor. "Anything else, my lady?" The title sounded strange. She wasn't a lady yet. Wouldn't be until tomorrow, when she signed away whatever freedom she had left. "What's your name?" The girl's eyes flicked up, startled. "Annie, my lady." "Annie, is the Duke really as terrible as they say?" It was an unfair question. The girl's face went pale, and she glanced at the door like she expected Mrs. Thorne to materialize and drag her away. I couldn't say, my lady." "Can't or won't?" Annie twisted her hands in her apron. His grace is complicated. That's all I know. I've only been here 6 months. Have you seen him? Twice. Once when I was hired, and once when I spilled tea in the corridor outside his study. Annie's voice dropped to barely a whisper. He didn't yell, didn't punish me, just looked at me like he was trying to figure out if I was worth the trouble of being angry at. Then he stepped around the mess and kept walking. That's it? That's all I got, my lady. He keeps to himself, hardly ever eats with the household, Mrs. Thorne runs everything, and we all just try to stay out of the way. Elara felt something cold settle in her stomach. A man who didn't yell, didn't punish, didn't engage, just observed and moved on. That was somehow worse than rage. Rage she could understand, could push against. This was like trying to fight fog. Thank you, Annie. That'll be all. The girl practically fled. Elara spent the next hour unpacking her trunks and trying not to think about tomorrow. Her wedding dress, modest, cream-colored, purchased in a hurry by her father's remaining staff, hung in the wardrobe like a ghost. She'd tried it on once and hated it immediately. Too much lace, too much pretense that this was anything other than a transaction. Night fell hard and fast. Dinner arrived on a tray, roasted chicken, vegetables, bread that was still warm, but Elara couldn't eat. She pushed the food around her plate and watched the candles burn down to stubs. At midnight, she gave up on sleep. She pulled on a dressing gown and paced the room like a caged animal. The corridors outside were silent, no footsteps, no voices. Just the howling wind and the occasional groan of old wood settling. Without consciously deciding to, she found herself at the door. Mrs. Thorne had said the east wing was off limits. The Duke's study was forbidden without permission. Well, she'd never been good at following rules designed to keep her in her place. The corridor was dark, lit only by the occasional guttering candle. Elara moved quietly, her bare feet silent on the cold stone. She didn't have a plan, didn't know what she was looking for. She just needed to move, to do something other than sit in that beautiful tomb and wait for her life to end. She passed closed doors and empty rooms, a library that smelled like leather and dust, a dining hall with a table long enough to seat 30. Everything was expensive and cold and empty. Then she heard voices. Elara froze, pressing herself against the wall. The voices were coming from around the corner. 2 men, their tones low and urgent. Don't care what the agreement was. She arrives tomorrow and I want to know everything. That voice, deep, rough, edged with something that might have been exhaustion or anger or both. It made the hair on her neck stand up. The father is desperate. Debts to half of London. The girl is, well, from what I understand, she's his last asset. A different voice, smoother, with an accent she couldn't place. He practically threw her at you. Then he's a fool. The first voice again, harder now. And when this is done, I want him to know exactly how much of a fool he's been. Adrian, you can't. I can do whatever I damn well please. The girl is under my protection now. That's the end of it. Silence. Then the smooth voice again. Careful now. She's not what you're used to. From what I've gathered, she's got a spine. Whitcomb's staff said she fought the whole arrangement tooth and nail. Good. A pause. I don't want a ghost in my house. Footsteps. Coming closer. Elara turned and ran. She made it back to her room with her heart slamming against her ribs and pressed her back against the door. Her hands were shaking. She'd heard the Duke, Adrian the other man had called him. She'd heard the Duke of Blackridge talking about her like she was a chess piece in a game she didn't understand. I don't want a ghost in my house. What the hell did that mean? Sleep, when it finally came, was fractured and full of shadows. The seamstress arrived at dawn with an assistant and enough fabric to outfit a small army. She was a cheerful woman, all smiles and chatter, completely oblivious to the fact that Elara wanted to throw herself out the window. Oh, you'll make a beautiful bride. His Grace has excellent taste. This silk is from Paris, you know, and these pearls, simply exquisite. Elara stood still while the woman pinned and tucked and fussed. The dress transformed around her. The modest cream gown became something else entirely with the addition of lace sleeves and a train that pooled on the floor. Pearls were sewn into the bodice. Her hair was twisted up and secured with pins that dug into her scalp. When it was done, She looked like someone else entirely. Someone elegant and refined and completely hollow. "Perfection," the seamstress declared. "His grace will be speechless." Good, Elara thought viciously. Maybe I'll get through the entire ceremony without hearing his voice. But she wasn't that lucky. The wedding took place in the manor's chapel, a small stone room with narrow windows and an altar that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of black marble. No guests, no family, just Mrs. Thorne, a nervous-looking priest, and a handful of servants who'd been ordered to witness, and the Duke. Elara saw him for the first time as she walked down the short aisle, and her breath caught. He was tall, taller than she'd expected, with broad shoulders and the kind of rigid posture that came from military training. Dark hair, cut short. Strong features that might have been handsome if they weren't carved into an expression of absolute neutrality. But it was his eyes that stopped her cold. Gray, like the storm outside, and just as turbulent beneath the surface. He watched her approach without any readable emotion. Not pleasure, not displeasure, just observation. Like she was a problem he was categorizing for later analysis. She wanted to punch him. Instead, she took her place beside him at the altar and tried to remember how to breathe. The priest began the ceremony. The words washed over her like cold water. Duty, honor, obedience, all the things men thought women owed them. She barely heard any of it. "Do you, Adrian Blackridge, Duke of Blackridge, take this woman?" "I do." His voice was the same one she'd heard last night, rough, deep, with an edge of something dangerous underneath. "And do you, Elara Whitcomb, take this man?" She should say yes, should get it over with, should be obedient and grateful and silent. "I do." The words tasted like ash. "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife." The priest looked at Adrian expectantly. The Duke didn't move. "You may kiss the bride, your grace." Adrian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Then he leaned down and pressed his lips to Elara's in a kiss so brief and cold it barely qualified as contact. It was done. She was the Duchess of Blackridge. She'd never felt more alone in her life. The wedding breakfast was torture. They sat at opposite ends of a table designed for a dozen people, served course after course of food neither of them touched. Adrian had changed into a dark coat and was reading correspondence while he pretended to eat. Elara sat in her wedding dress and stared at the wall. Mrs. Thorne hovered nearby, directing servants with subtle gestures. After 30 minutes of excruciating silence, Adrian set down his papers and looked at her directly for the first time since the ceremony. "You'll want to change," he said. "I've arranged for Annie to attend you as a lady's maid. Mrs. Thorne will brief you on the household schedule." "Is that all?" His eyes narrowed slightly. "I'm sorry? Is that all you have to say to me? Instructions on changing my clothes and learning the schedule? What else would you like me to say?" "I don't know. Perhaps something that acknowledges we just got married? Or is that too personal for you?" A muscle jumped in his jaw. "This isn't a love match, Miss Whitcomb. It's your grace now, actually. Or did you forget that part already?" The room went deadly silent. Even Mrs. Thorne looked startled. Adrian stood slowly, his full height suddenly intimidating. "Are you trying to provoke me?" "I'm trying to establish that I exist," Elara shot back, standing as well. "That I'm not a piece of furniture you purchased along with my father's debts. If we're going to live in the same house, I'd prefer at least the courtesy of basic conversation." Basic conversation. He said it like she'd proposed something obscene. "Fine. How do you take your tea?" "I don't drink tea." "Then we have nothing to discuss." He turned to leave. "Do you always run from women who speak to you, or am I special?" Adrian stopped, turned back. When he looked at her this time, there was something new in his eyes, something that might have been anger, or might have been interest, or might have been both. "I don't run from anything," he said quietly. "Then stay. Talk to me. Tell me why you married me if you clearly don't want a wife." "You wouldn't understand." "Try me. I'm surprisingly intelligent for purchased goods." His expression flickered. Then, impossibly, the corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close enough to surprise them both. You're angry, he observed. Brilliant deduction. And you think provoking me will help? I think sitting in silence while you pretend I don't exist will kill me faster than any provocation could. He studied her for a long moment. Then he pulled out the chair nearest to him and sat. You have 10 minutes. Ask whatever you want. Elara blinked. She hadn't expected him to actually concede. Why did you marry me? To settle your father's debts. That's not an answer. You could have bought the debts without marrying me. Your father specified that the debts would only be forgiven upon marriage. Why would he? She stopped, thought about it. He wanted to make sure I couldn't come back. If the debts were just paid, I could leave you and return home. But married to you, I'm legally yours. Legally mine, Adrian repeated, and something dark crossed his face. Yes, that's exactly what you are. And you agreed to this because I had my reasons. That's not an answer either. It's the one you're getting. Elara wanted to scream. Every response was a wall. Every answer was designed to shut down further questions. But there was something in his eyes now. Not warmth exactly, but engagement. He was actually looking at her, actually listening. It wasn't much, but it was more than nothing. One more question, she said. Are you going to expect me to share your bed? If she'd shocked him, he didn't show it. No? Why not? That's 2 questions. Answer it anyway. His eyes held hers. Because I have no interest in unwilling partners. Your rooms are your own. I won't enter them without invitation. And if I never invite you, then I'll die having kept one promise in my life. There was something raw in the way he said it, something that made her think there was a whole story buried in those words. But before she could push, he stood. Your 10 minutes are up. He left without looking back. Elara sank into her chair and tried to process what had just happened. She'd challenged a duke, her husband, and he'd… What? Engaged? Retreated? Both? Mrs. Thorne appeared at her elbow like a specter. That was remarkably foolish, Your Grace. Probably, Elara agreed, but at least now I know he can talk. His Grace values his privacy. His Grace married me. Privacy went out the window. Mrs. Thorne's expression was unreadable. The Duke is not a simple man. I'm beginning to gather that. If you're wise, you'll stop pushing him. Elara looked up at the housekeeper. And if I'm not wise? For the first time, something that might have been respect flickered across Mrs. Thorne's face. Then I suggest you learn to fight properly. You'll need it. That night, Elara lay in her bed, the Duchess's bed, she supposed, and stared at the ceiling. Outside, the storm had finally broken, replaced by an eerie calm. Moonlight spilled through the windows, turning everything silver and strange. She'd survived the wedding, survived the first confrontation, survived the first day as the Duchess of Blackridge. But survival wasn't enough. She'd meant what she said to Adrian. She wouldn't disappear, wouldn't become a ghost in this house. If he wanted an obedient, silent wife, he'd married the wrong woman. The question was, what would he do about it? She was about to find out. The door to her chambers opened. Elara sat up, heart hammering. A figure stood in the doorway, backlit by the corridor candles. Adrian. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. In his hand, she caught the glint of steel. A knife. What? Her voice came out steady despite the fear coursing through her. What are you doing? He moved closer, and in the moonlight she could see his face. It was expressionless, controlled, but his eyes were storm-dark and intense. Testing a theory, he said quietly. He was beside the bed now. The knife gleamed in his hand. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to scream, to call for help. But something in his posture, in the way he held himself, made her pause. He wasn't moving like someone about to attack. He was moving like someone conducting an experiment. The blade pressed against her throat, cold metal, sharp edge, just enough pressure to be felt without breaking skin. Scream, Adrian said, his voice barely above a whisper, and I'll know you're already broken. The fear was real, the danger was real, but so was the strange certainty that this was a test, not a threat. Elara met his eyes in the darkness and found her voice. "Try to break me," she whispered back, "and I'll know you're already afraid." The knife stilled. For a long moment, they stayed frozen. Her with a blade at her throat, him standing over her like a dark angel carved from stone. Then, slowly, Adrian pulled the knife away. He looked at it, then at her, and something in his expression cracked. "You didn't scream," he said, and there was wonder in his voice. Actual wonder. "You didn't cut me." "I could have." "But you didn't." He sat down on the edge of the bed, still holding the knife, and for the first time since she'd met him, Adrian Blackridge looked uncertain. "My first wife screamed," he said quietly. "The first night we were married, I came to her room to talk, and she screamed, thought I was going to hurt her. She spent our entire marriage terrified of me." He turned the blade over in his hands. "I swore I'd never marry again, never put another woman through that." "Then why did you marry me?" "Because you needed protection, and I needed—" He stopped, shook his head. "It doesn't matter. It matters to me." He looked at her then, really looked at her, like he was seeing her for the first time. "You're not afraid of me." "I'm terrified of you," Elara corrected. "But fear and breaking aren't the same thing." Something shifted in his expression. The walls didn't come down exactly, but they cracked. Just a little. "Your father told me you were obedient, compliant, that you'd be grateful for the arrangement." "My father's a liar and a coward." "I'm beginning to see that." Adrian stood, pocketing the knife. "I won't test you again. You've proven your point." "And what point is that?" He paused at the door, his profile sharp in the moonlight. "That I didn't buy a ghost. I bought a storm." Then he was gone. Elara lay back down, her heart still racing, her throat still feeling the ghost of cold steel. She should be furious, should be terrified, should be planning her escape. Instead, she found herself smiling in the darkness. Because Adrian Blackridge, the cold, untouchable Duke, had just revealed something crucial. He was just as trapped as she was, just as desperate to be seen. And if there was one thing Elara Whitcomb knew how to do, it was exploit a weakness. Tomorrow, she decided, she'd start taking control of this household. Tomorrow, she'd start fighting back. Tomorrow, the real battle would begin. But tonight, she'd survived. And survival, as it turned out, was just the first move in a much longer game. Morning came with a knock that could wake the dead. Elara dragged herself from sleep, her neck still tingling where the knife had pressed. She'd barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Adrian's face in the moonlight, heard his voice saying, "I bought a storm." "Your Grace?" Annie's voice, tentative through the door. "Mrs. Thorne says breakfast is in 20 minutes. 20 minutes to make herself presentable. 20 minutes to armor up for whatever fresh hell today would bring." She made it in 15. The breakfast room was empty except for Mrs. Thorne, who stood by the sideboard like a sentry. No Adrian, no explanation for his absence. "His Grace left at dawn," Mrs. Thorne said, answering the unspoken question. "He had business in the village." "Does he always run away after testing his wives with knives, or am I special?" The words were out before Elara could stop them. Mrs. Thorne's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes, shock maybe, or alarm. "I don't know what you're referring to, Your Grace." "Of course you don't." Elara poured herself coffee with hands that were steadier than she felt. "Tell me, Mrs. Thorne, how long have you worked here?" 15 years. "And in those 15 years, how many duchesses have you served?" 2, Your Grace. The late Duchess Catherine, and now yourself." "What happened to Catherine?" Mrs. Thorne's face went carefully blank. "She passed 3 years ago. Pneumonia. In the middle of summer. It was a wet summer. The Duchess had a delicate constitution." Lies. Or at least not the whole truth. Elara could smell it like smoke. "Where are the household accounts kept?" Mrs. Thorne blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "The accounts? Expenses, wages, purchases, where are they?" "His Grace manages all financial matters personally." "That's not what I asked." Elara set down her coffee cup with enough force to make it clink. "I'm the Duchess of this house. That means I have responsibilities, one of which is ensuring the household runs efficiently. So I'll ask again. Where are the accounts? The housekeeper's jaw tightened. In His Grace's study. The one I'm not allowed to enter? The very same. How convenient. Elara stood, smoothing her dress. Then I suppose I'll have to make do with a tour of the rest of the house, starting now. Your Grace, I have duties, and I'm giving you a new one. Show me everything. Kitchens, storerooms, servants' quarters, every inch of this place that isn't the forbidden East Wing. If I'm going to live here, I'm going to know what I'm living in. Mrs. Thorne looked like she'd swallowed glass, but she was a professional, and professionals adapted. As you wish, Your Grace. This way. The tour took 3 hours and revealed more than Elara had expected. The kitchens were efficient but understaffed, 2 cooks managing meals for a household that should have required 4. The storerooms were half empty, supplies running low on basics like flour and sugar. The servants' quarters were cramped, 6 people sharing spaces meant for 3. And everywhere, there was a sense of abandonment. Like the house had been grand once but was slowly being allowed to decay. How many staff does the household employ? Elara asked as they climbed back toward the main floor. 12, Your Grace, plus the groundskeeper and his son. This house should need 30 at minimum. His Grace prefers a smaller staff. His Grace prefers to pretend this house doesn't exist, Elara corrected. When was the last time the silver was polished, the carpets beaten, the windows properly cleaned? Mrs. Thorne's silence was answer enough. They emerged into the main hall just as the front doors opened and Adrian strode in, mud on his boots and rain on his shoulders. He stopped when he saw them, his expression unreadable. You're awake. Observant, Elara said. We were just discussing the household management, or lack thereof. His eyes narrowed. Mrs. Thorne runs the household perfectly well. Mrs. Thorne is running herself into the ground because you've given her half the staff she needs, and apparently no budget to work with. When was the last time you actually looked at this place? I look at it every day. No, you live in it. That's not the same thing. Elara crossed her arms. The storerooms are nearly empty, the staff is overworked, and from what I can tell, you're hemorrhaging money on inefficiencies that could be fixed with basic oversight. Adrian's jaw clenched. This is not your concern. I'm the Duchess. It's literally my concern. You've been here 2 days, and I've learned more about this household in 3 hours than you apparently have in years. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so the servants wouldn't hear. You bought a wife, Adrian. Did you think I'd just sit in my room and embroider? I need purpose. Give me the household or I'll go mad. He studied her face, and she could see him calculating, weighing, deciding. Fine, he said finally. Mrs. Thorne, transfer household management to Her Grace. She wants purpose. Let her have it. Mrs. Thorne looked like she'd been slapped. Your Grace, I don't think... That wasn't a request. Adrian turned back to Elara. You want control of the household? It's yours. Budget, staff, supplies, all of it. But if you fail, if you run this place into the ground, don't expect me to save you. I won't need saving. We'll see. He walked past her toward his study, then paused. There's a dinner party Friday, Lord and Lady Ashford and their circle. You'll attend as my Duchess, and you'll be presentable. Presentable or silent? Both would be ideal. The study door closed behind him with a decisive click. Elara turned to Mrs. Thorne, who looked like she was processing a personal apocalypse. Right. Show me the household accounts, all of them. The accounts were a disaster. Elara spread the ledgers across the library table and felt her head start to pound. Income was steady. Adrian's lands were profitable, his investments sound. But the expenses were chaos. Money hemorrhaging in a dozen different directions with no oversight, no planning, no control. 3 different suppliers for flour, all charging different rates. Wages that hadn't been adjusted in 5 years. Repairs delayed until they became emergencies that cost twice as much. This is insane, she muttered, running her finger down a column of numbers. You're paying 50% more than market rate for candles. Mrs. Thorne, sitting stiffly across from her, said nothing. And these repairs to the East Wing, what are they for? The Duke's private quarters. He's spending a fortune maintaining rooms only he uses while the rest of the house falls apart. The Duke values his privacy. The Duke is an idiot. Elara caught herself, softened her tone. Mrs. Thorne, I'm not trying to undermine you, but this can't continue. We need to consolidate suppliers, renegotiate contracts, prioritize repairs, and we need more staff. His Grace won't approve additional staff. Then I'll convince him. She closed the ledger. Give me until Friday. I'll have a proposal ready. The housekeeper's expression shifted, something that might have been respect or might have been curiosity. You really think you can change his mind? I think he gave me control of this household because he assumed I'd fail. I'm very motivated to prove him wrong. The next 3 days were a blur of activity. Elara met with every servant individually, learning their names, their duties, their frustrations. She visited the village, introduced herself to the suppliers, negotiated better rates with a smile and a spine of steel. She reorganized the storerooms, updated the inventory systems, and drafted a staffing proposal that would make the household actually functional. And slowly, reluctantly, the house began to respond. Fresh flowers appeared in the main hall, Annie's idea, implemented without permission. The kitchens started producing better meals now that they had proper supplies. The servants, initially wary of the new Duchess, began to warm up when they realized she actually listened to them. Even Mrs. Thorne thawed slightly. You have a good head for this, the housekeeper admitted on Thursday afternoon as they reviewed the week's expenses. Better than I expected. You expected me to fail. I expected you to try and then give up when you realized how stubborn His Grace can be. I'm more stubborn, Mrs. Thorne almost smiled. I'm beginning to see that. That evening, Elara found Adrian in his study, the forbidden study she was still technically not allowed to enter. She knocked and walked in without waiting for an answer. He looked up from his desk, irritation flashing across his face. I don't recall inviting you in. You gave me control of the household. The household includes your study. She set the proposal on his desk. I need your approval on this. What is it? A staffing plan. 6 additional servants, plus renegotiated contracts with our suppliers that will save us 15% annually. The numbers are all there. Adrian picked up the proposal and read it in silence. His expression gave nothing away. This would require a significant initial investment, he said finally, which would pay for itself in 8 months. I did the math. And you think you can manage this? I know I can. He set down the proposal and looked at her directly. Why does this matter to you? It's just a house. It's my house now too, and I'm not going to live in a place that's falling apart because you're too busy hiding in your study to notice. She leaned forward, hands on his desk. You want to know the truth, Adrian? I'm bored. I'm angry. And I need something to do with all of that before I set something on fire. Give me this. A long silence. Then he picked up his pen and signed the proposal. Don't make me regret this. I won't. She was halfway to the door when his voice stopped her. Elara. She turned. He was still sitting at his desk, but his posture had shifted, less defensive, more uncertain. You're good at this, he said quietly. Better than Catherine ever was. She never got the chance, did she? You kept her locked away like a porcelain doll. His jaw tightened. I was trying to protect her. From what? From me. The words hung in the air between them. Elara wanted to push, to demand answers, but something in his expression made her hesitate. There was pain there. Real pain buried under layers of ice. I'm not Catherine, she said instead. You don't need to protect me from yourself. You don't know what you're asking. Then tell me. But the walls came back up. She could see it happening in real time, the shutters closing, the armor snapping back into place. The Ashfords arrive tomorrow at 7. Don't be late. Dismissed. Elara left the study with more questions than answers, and a growing certainty that Adrian Blackridge was not the monster everyone thought he was. He was something more complicated, something broken. And broken things, she was learning, could either be mended or weaponized. She hadn't decided which approach to take yet. Friday arrived with perfect weather and Elara's first real test. Annie helped her dress in a gown of deep emerald silk, one of the few expensive items in her trousseau. Her hair was pinned up in an elaborate style that made her neck look longer, pearls at her throat. gloves to her elbows. She looked like a duchess. Now she just had to act like one. The Ashfords arrived precisely at 7 with an entourage that filled the entrance hall. Lord Ashford was a portly man with a florid face and a booming laugh. His wife was thin and sharp, with eyes that missed nothing. And trailing behind them were 3 other couples, all dressed in their finest, all clearly here to inspect the new duchess. Adrian greeted them with cold courtesy, then turned to Elara. "My wife, the Duchess of Blackridge." The scrutiny was immediate and intense. Lady Ashford looked her up and down like she was evaluating livestock. "How charming," she said, her tone making it clear she found nothing charming at all. "I had heard the Duke remarried. So sudden after dear Catherine." 3 years is hardly sudden, Elara replied smoothly, "but I appreciate your concern." "Of course. And your family, the Whitcombes of Surrey, is it?" The trap was obvious. They wanted her to admit her family's disgrace, to establish her as beneath them. Elara smiled. "The very same, though I'm a Blackridge now, which I find infinitely more interesting." Adrian's hand twitched at his side. Surprise, maybe, or approval. Hard to tell. Dinner was an exercise in social warfare. The conversation circled around politics, gossip, and carefully worded insults disguised as pleasantries. Elara held her own, deflecting questions about her father and redirecting attention to the household improvements she'd already implemented. "You've certainly made your mark quickly," Lady Ashford observed, her fork pausing over her fish. "Most new brides take months to settle in." "I'm not most brides." Really? The word dripped with condescension. "Though I do wonder if His Grace appreciates such assertiveness in a wife." Elara glanced at Adrian, who was watching the exchange with an unreadable expression. "You'd have to ask him." All eyes turned to the Duke. Adrian set down his wine glass with deliberate care. "My wife's competence is one of her many virtues. I find it refreshing." The silence that followed was delicious. Lady Ashford recovered quickly, but the damage was done. Adrian had publicly endorsed her. That meant something in this world of social hierarchies and careful positioning. The rest of dinner passed more smoothly. The men retreated to the library for brandy and cigars. The women gathered in the drawing room, and Elara endured an hour of veiled insults and false compliments before the guests finally, mercifully, departed. She found Adrian in his study afterward, still in his dinner clothes, staring at the fire. "Thank you," she said from the doorway, "for what you said at dinner." "I meant it." He didn't look at her. "You handled them well." "They were testing me." "They'll keep testing you. Ashford and his circle are vultures. They smell weakness, and they feed on it." "Then it's a good thing I'm not weak." He finally turned to face her. "No, you're not." Something in the air shifted. They were alone in the study, the house quiet around them, and for the first time since the wedding, there was no anger between them, no walls, just awareness. "Why did you marry me?" Elara asked quietly. "The real reason." Adrian's expression closed off. "I told you. You told me what you thought I'd accept. I'm asking for the truth." He studied her for a long moment. Then he crossed to his desk and pulled out a letter, handing it to her. Elara unfolded it and read, "Your Grace, the matter we discussed has grown urgent. The men who seek the item you possess will not stop with threats. They will come for you directly, and when they do, they will use any leverage they can find. A wife, perhaps, or a family connection. You need protection. The kind that comes from appearing to have normal ties, normal motivations. Consider this carefully." M. She looked up. "Who is M?" "Someone who keeps me informed of threats." "What item? What are they after?" "Information I acquired during the war. Names, locations, evidence of crimes that certain powerful men would prefer stayed buried." He took the letter back. "I've kept it hidden for 3 years. They've been trying to recover it ever since." "And you married me to make yourself look, what, less threatening?" "To make it look like I had other priorities. A wife to manage, a household to run. Domestic concerns that would keep me occupied and make me seem less dangerous." He smiled, but there was no humor in it. "It was supposed to be a performance. You were supposed to be quiet and forgettable. But I'm not." "No, you're not." Elara's mind raced. "So I'm what, bait?" A target? You're under my protection. As long as you're my wife, you're untouchable. That's the code these men live by. They'll go after me, but not my family. That's insane. That's reality. She wanted to be angry, wanted to rage at him for using her, but instead she felt something else, a strange, fierce understanding. He'd married her to protect himself, yes, but he'd also protected her in the process. The knife, she said suddenly. That first night, you were testing to see if I'd break under pressure. I needed to know if you could handle it. If they came for you, if they tried to use you against me, I needed to know you wouldn't shatter. And? You didn't scream. No, she agreed. I didn't. They stood in silence, the fire crackling between them. Outside, thunder rumbled, another storm rolling in. There's something else you should know, Adrian said finally. The East Wing, the reason it's forbidden. I'm listening. That's where Catherine died, in the room that's now locked. I found her there 3 years ago, cold and still, and the doctors called it pneumonia, but I knew... He stopped, swallowed hard. She killed herself. Because she was terrified of me, terrified of this life, and I was too blind to see it until it was too late. The confession hung in the air like smoke. Adrian, I swore I'd never put another woman through that. Never marry again. But then M's letter came, and I needed cover, and your father was desperate enough to sell you, and I thought... He laughed bitterly. I thought I could keep you at a distance, keep you safe by keeping you separate. But you won't stay separate, will you? No, Elara said softly. I won't. Then you need to understand the risk. These men are dangerous. They've killed before. And if they think you're important to me, they'll come for you. Let them try. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his expression cracked wide open. You mean that? I mean that. You're insane. Probably, but I'm your wife, and I'm not going anywhere, so you're stuck with me. Adrian crossed the room in 3 strides and stopped inches from her, close enough that she could feel the heat coming off him. You don't know what you're getting into. Then teach me. Elara, teach me to fight. Teach me to protect myself. If I'm going to be a target, I'm going to be a prepared one. That's exactly what I need. You want me safe? Make me dangerous. He stared at her like she'd sprouted a second head. Then, impossibly, he smiled. A real smile, the first she'd seen from him. You're out of your mind. And you're stalling. Do we have a deal or not? Adrian extended his hand. We have a deal. She shook it, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip. Training starts tomorrow, he said. 5 in the morning. Don't be late. I'm never late. We'll see. He released her hand and stepped back. And just like that, the moment broke. But something had shifted between them. Some fundamental understanding had been reached. They weren't allies yet, weren't friends. Barely knew each other. But they were partners now. And in a house full of secrets and shadows, that was something. Elara left the study and walked back to her chambers, her mind spinning. She'd come to Blackridge Manor expecting a prison. Instead, she'd found a battlefield. And she was just getting started. The storm broke overhead with a crack of thunder that shook the windows. Elara stood at her window and watched lightning split the sky, illuminating the grounds in brief, violent flashes. Somewhere out there, men were hunting her husband, hunting information that could destroy powerful people. And now, by extension, they were hunting her. She should be terrified. Instead, she felt alive. The knock came just after midnight. Elara was still awake, reviewing household accounts by candlelight when she heard it. 3 sharp raps on her door. Come in. Adrian entered, changed into dark clothing that looked almost military. In his hands were 2 leather-wrapped bundles. Couldn't sleep either? He asked. Too much coffee. Or too much thinking. He set the bundles on her table and unwrapped the first one, revealing a knife, smaller than the one he'd used to test her, but wickedly sharp. Your first lesson starts now. You said 5 in the morning. I lied. If someone comes for you, they won't wait for a convenient time. He handed her the knife. Feel the weight. Get used to it. Elara took the blade, and something primal stirred in her chest. This was real. This was happening. What's in the other bundle? Adrian unwrapped it to reveal a pistol. Small, elegant, deadly. For when a knife isn't enough. He spent the next hour teaching her the basics: how to hold the knife, where to strike, how to create distance. His touch was clinical, professional, but there was an intensity to the way he moved that made her pulse quicken. Again, he said after she'd practiced a defensive move for the 10th time. Faster. She struck out and he caught her wrist, redirecting the blow. Good. But you're telegraphing. Don't think. React. They moved through the forms again and again until sweat dampened her nightgown and her arms ached. Finally, Adrian stepped back. Enough for tonight. We'll continue tomorrow. Adrian, she said as he gathered the weapons, thank you for trusting me with this. He paused at the door. Don't thank me yet. This gets harder from here. I can handle it. I know. He looked back at her, and in the candlelight, his expression was unguarded, vulnerable. That's what scares me. Then he was gone, leaving her alone with the knife and the growing certainty that she'd just crossed a line there was no coming back from. She'd stopped being a victim. Now she was becoming something else entirely. And the men hunting Adrian Blackridge had no idea what was coming for them. But 3 weeks later, they made their move anyway. Elara woke that morning to the sound of rain against her window and the now familiar ache in her muscles from training. Adrian had been relentless. Every dawn brought knife work. Every evening brought pistol practice in the empty stables where no one could hear the shots. Her hands had blistered, then calloused. Her reflexes had sharpened. She wasn't a soldier. Not yet. But she wasn't helpless either. She dressed and made her way downstairs, finding the household already in motion. In 3 weeks, she'd transformed the place. New staff had been hired. Suppliers consolidated. The house gleamed now, properly maintained for the first time in years. Even Mrs. Thorne had started looking less exhausted. Adrian was in the breakfast room, reading correspondence with the kind of focus that meant bad news. What is it? Elara asked, pouring herself coffee. He glanced up, and she caught the tension in his jaw. Nothing that concerns you. Everything here concerns me. She sat across from him. We had a deal, remember? Partners. He set down the letter. There's been movement, people asking questions in the village about the household, about you. Her pulse kicked up. The men you told me about? Possibly, or curious gossip. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. He folded the letter carefully. I'm riding to London today, meeting with M. I need to know if this is a real threat or just noise. I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. Adrian, this isn't a negotiation. If they're watching, splitting up makes us both harder targets. You stay here where the staff can keep eyes on you. I'll be back by nightfall. She wanted to argue, but the logic was sound. And beneath his usual cold delivery, she heard something else. Worry. Fine, but you take William with you. William was the groundskeeper's son, built like an ox and fiercely loyal to Adrian. And you're armed. I'm always armed. More armed than usual. The corner of his mouth twitched. You're getting paranoid. You made me paranoid. Don't complain about the results. He stood, came around the table, and in a gesture that still surprised her, rested his hand briefly on her shoulder. Stay inside today. Don't open the door for anyone you don't know, and keep the knife I gave you close. You're really worried about this. I'm always worried. That's how I've stayed alive this long. His hand tightened slightly. Promise me, Elara, no heroics today. No heroics, she agreed. He left within the hour, riding out with William into rain that was rapidly turning to sleet. Elara watched from the window until they disappeared into the gray morning, then forced herself to turn away. She had work to do. The household accounts needed updating, and there was a dispute between two of the kitchen staff that needed settling. Normal things. Safe things. Things that had nothing to do with mysterious enemies or dangerous secrets. She threw herself into the work, grateful for the distraction. By noon, the rain had become a downpour. The servants moved through the house lighting extra candles, fighting against the early darkness. Elara was in the library reviewing supplier contracts when Mrs. Thorne appeared in the doorway. Your Grace, there's a man at the door. Says he has an urgent message for the Duke. Elara set down her pen. What kind of message? He wouldn't say, but he's soaked through and looks half frozen. Should I send him away? Every instinct Adrian had drilled into her screamed danger, but turning away a messenger in this weather could be genuine cruelty if he was legitimate. Bring him to the entrance hall. I'll see him there. And Mrs. Thorne? Have Thomas stand nearby. Thomas was the largest of the footmen, a former boxer who'd come to service after an injury ended his fighting career. If this was a threat, she wanted muscle close. The man waiting in the entrance hall looked harmless enough, middle-aged, thin, dressed in the simple clothes of a courier. He clutched a sealed letter and dripped water onto the marble floor. Your Grace, he bowed awkwardly. I have a message for the Duke of Blackridge. Urgent, they said. The Duke is away on business. I can accept it on his behalf. I was told to deliver it to His Grace personally. And I'm telling you that I'm the Duchess, and whatever concerns my husband concerns me. The letter. Now. He hesitated, then handed it over. Elara broke the seal and read, Blackridge, your wife is in danger. The men we discussed have moved their timetable. They believe you've hidden the documents in the manor. They're coming tonight. Get her out. M. The paper crumpled in her fist. When did you receive this? This morning, Your Grace. I rode straight here, but the weather... Who gave it to you? A gentleman in London. Paid well for fast delivery. Elara's mind raced. Tonight. They were coming tonight, and Adrian was in London, hours away even if he rode flat out. She was alone except for the servants, and she looked up at the courier, really looked at him, and saw it. His hands weren't shaking from cold. His eyes weren't on her face, but on the positions of the servants, cataloging exits and distances. And there, just visible under his wet coat, the edge of a leather strap, a weapon harness. Not a courier, a scout. Thomas, she said quietly, not taking her eyes off the man. Please escort this gentleman to the kitchen for something warm to drink. The man smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. That's very kind, Your Grace, but I should be getting back. I insist. His hand moved toward his coat. Elara's hand was already in her pocket, fingers closing around the small knife she'd started carrying everywhere. She didn't draw it, didn't need to. The threat was clear. The kitchen, she repeated. Now. Or I start screaming, and you have to explain to the entire household why you pulled a weapon on the Duchess. Calculation flickered across his face. Then he nodded slowly. The kitchen would be lovely. Thomas moved in, his bulk suddenly menacing, and guided the man away. The second they were gone, Elara turned to Mrs. Thorne. Send someone to the village. Find the constable. Tell him we need him here immediately. Your Grace, what's happening? We're about to be attacked. How many able-bodied men do we have on the grounds? Mrs. Thorne went pale. 5, counting Thomas and the groundskeeper. The rest are women and boys. 5, against however many men were coming. Elara forced herself to think. The manor was defensible. Adrian had chosen it for that reason. Thick walls, limited entrances, good sightlines from the upper windows. But they needed time. Time for the constable to arrive. Time for Adrian to return. Time to prepare. Lock all the doors except the main entrance. Bar the windows on the ground floor. Get the staff into the upper levels. Anyone who can't fight stays away from the doors. The men who can fight, arm them with whatever we have. Your Grace, this is madness. This is survival. Do it. Now. Mrs. Thorne ran. Elara went to Adrian's study, ignoring the rule about entering without permission. She needed weapons, and she needed them fast. The desk drawer was locked, but she'd watched him open it enough times to know which key on his ring would work. She'd lifted it from his coat 2 days ago, just in case. Just in case had arrived. The drawer opened to reveal a pistol, larger than the one he'd trained her with, and a box of ammunition. She loaded it with shaking hands, praying she remembered the steps correctly, then stuck it in her belt and grabbed the knife from the second drawer. 2 weapons. Better than none. Outside, the storm had turned vicious. Thunder cracked like artillery fire. Lightning turned the grounds into brief, stark snapshots of twisted trees and driving rain, perfect cover for an attack. She found Thomas in the kitchen, standing guard over the fake courier, who was now bound to a chair with kitchen twine. Has he said anything? Not a word, Your Grace. Just keep smiling. The man looked up at her, and his smile widened. You should have run when you had the chance. How many are you? Enough. When are they coming? Soon enough that you'll never make it out. He leaned forward against his bonds. The Duke thought he was clever, hiding you here. Thought we'd respect the code. But the code only applies to wives who don't interfere. You've made yourself a player, Duchess. That changes everything. Ice flooded her veins. What are you talking about? The household accounts, the suppliers. You've been all over the village, asking questions, making changes. Someone noticed. Someone reported that the new Duchess was very interested in where things came from and where they went. His smile turned cruel, and one of those supply routes was ours. You found a discrepancy, didn't you? In the lumber deliveries? She had. She'd found that someone was ordering twice as much lumber as the estate needed and routing the excess somewhere else. She'd assumed it was simple theft, meant to investigate it further after dealing with more pressing issues. But it wasn't theft. It was how they'd been watching the manor, watching Adrian, and she'd nearly uncovered them. You made yourself valuable, the man continued. Made yourself someone worth interrogating. The Duke's quiet wife would have been safe. But you? You're a threat, and threats get eliminated. Elara's hand found the pistol at her belt. Thomas, get him out of my sight, somewhere secure where he can't signal his friends. The wine cellar, Your Grace? Perfect. Thomas hauled the man up, and as he passed Elara, the courier whispered, They're going to burn this place to the ground with you in it. The cellar door slammed shut. Elara stood in the kitchen, breathing hard, trying to process. She'd thought she was just managing a household. Instead, she'd stumbled into Adrian's war without realizing it, and now she was the target. Mrs. Thorne appeared. Her usual composure cracked. The house is secured, Your Grace, but the storm is getting worse. The boy I sent to the village, I don't know if he'll make it through. Then we prepare like he won't? Elara squared her shoulders. Everyone to the upper floors. Anyone who can shoot gets a weapon. The rest barricade themselves in the strongest rooms and don't come out until I say so. Your Grace, perhaps you should hide as well. I'm not hiding. These are my people now, my household. I'm not letting anyone burn it down. Mrs. Thorne studied her face, then nodded sharply. The Duke chose well, even if he doesn't know it yet. They worked fast. The 5 men, Thomas, the groundskeeper Robert and his son Peter, and 2 stable hands named James and Samuel, gathered in the main hall. Elara distributed what weapons they had, 2 more pistols from Adrian's collection, an old rifle that Robert swore still worked, and an assortment of knives and makeshift clubs. They're coming to take me, she told them bluntly. Anyone who wants to leave, leave now. I won't think less of you. No one moved. Right then. She checked her pistol one more time. Robert, you and Peter take the east corridor. Watch the windows. If you see movement, fire a warning shot. James, Samuel, you're on the west. Thomas, you're with me. We hold the main entrance. Your Grace, James said hesitantly. Begging your pardon, but have you ever actually shot anyone? No. Have you? No, ma'am? Then we'll figure it out together. Lightning flashed, and in the brief illumination, she saw something move across the grounds. They were here. Positions, she hissed. Now. The men scattered. Elara took up position behind a heavy table they'd dragged in front of the main doors, Thomas beside her with a pistol in one hand and a fireplace poker in the other. Your Grace, he said quietly, if it comes to it, if they breach the door, you run. Don't argue, just run. The staff will buy you time. Thomas, please, let us do this. His Grace would have our heads if anything happened to you. She wanted to argue, wanted to say they were all equal here, but there wasn't time. The first shot shattered a window on the east side. Robert's rifle answered immediately, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Shouting from outside, running footsteps. How many? Elara yelled. At least 6 that I can see, Robert called back. Maybe more. 6 against 5, not impossible odds. But these were trained fighters against servants who'd probably never been in a real fight. Another window broke. Something heavy slammed against the front doors. They're trying to ram it. Thomas moved to brace the furniture barricade. It won't hold long. Elara's mind raced. The doors wouldn't hold. The windows were already compromised. They needed to change the terrain, force the attackers into a bottleneck where numbers meant less. "Fall back," she ordered. "Everyone to the main stairs. We funnel them up." The staff retreated in controlled chaos. Elara was the last to leave, firing a shot through the door, not to hit anyone, just to make them hesitate, before running for the stairs. The front doors exploded inward just as she reached the landing. 6 men poured through, dressed in dark clothes, faces covered, all armed. Professional. Military. Exactly what she'd feared. The lid man looked up and saw her. "There! The Duchess! Take her alive!" Pistol shots rang out from the upper floor. One of the attackers went down, screaming and clutching his leg. The others scattered, taking cover behind furniture. Elara fired, missed, swore, fired again. This time she hit something. She heard the impact, heard someone grunt in pain. But they kept coming. One of them made it to the stairs. Thomas met him halfway with the poker, and they grappled. The attacker was trained, but Thomas had weight and rage on his side. They tumbled back down the stairs in a tangle of limbs. "Keep moving," Elara screamed at the staff. "Higher!" They scrambled up another flight. Behind them, the sounds of fighting echoed through the house. Breaking glass. Gunshots. Men shouting orders. They reached the 3rd floor and Elara slammed a heavy door behind them, throwing the bolt. "Barricade it! Everything heavy against the door." They piled furniture, wardrobes, chests, anything that would slow an advance. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the pistol. "How many rounds do you have left?" Robert asked. 3, maybe 4. She'd lost count. "I'm out." He showed her the empty rifle. "Peter?" 2 shots. They were almost out of ammunition and trapped on the 3rd floor. If the attackers were smart, they'd just wait them out or set the place on fire like the courier had promised. But then she heard it. Hoofbeats, coming fast through the storm, and a voice roaring over the thunder. "Elara!" Adrian, he'd come back. The fighting below changed character immediately. New sounds, steel on steel, the meaty impact of fists on flesh. Adrian wasn't shooting. He was engaging them directly, and from the screaming, he was winning. "Your Grace." Thomas touched her arm. "His Grace will have this handled. You should stay here where it's safe." But safe wasn't the point anymore. She'd spent her whole life being safe, being quiet, being invisible. That woman was dead. Elara unlocked the door and started down the stairs before anyone could stop her. The scene below was carnage. 3 attackers were down, 1 unconscious, 2 clutching wounds. Adrian was in the center of the entrance hall, fighting 2 men at once. His coat was torn, blood on his face. She couldn't tell if it was his or theirs. He moved like violence given form, every strike precise and brutal. He was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. One of the men saw her on the stairs and broke away from Adrian, running at her with a knife drawn. Training took over. Elara raised the pistol, aimed center mass like Adrian had taught her, and fired. The shot took him in the shoulder. He spun with the impact, crashed into the banister, and went down. The man didn't get back up. She'd shot someone. The reality of it hit her like a physical blow. Her hands were shaking again, her ears ringing from the gunshot. She'd shot a person, actually pulled the trigger and, "Elara, down!" Adrian's voice cut through her shock. She dropped without thinking. The last attacker, the leader who'd ordered them to take her alive, had a pistol aimed at her head. His shot went high, punching into the wall where she'd been standing. Adrian closed the distance between them in 3 strides and disarmed the man with brutal efficiency. The pistol clattered away. Then Adrian's fist connected with the man's jaw, and he went down hard. Silence fell. The storm still raged outside, but inside the manor, everything had gone still. Adrian stood in the center of the destruction, breathing hard, blood dripping from a cut above his eye. His gaze found Elara on the stairs. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice. He crossed to her in 2 steps and pulled her against him. The hug was fierce, almost painful, his heart hammering against her ear. "You weren't supposed to fight," he said roughly. "You were supposed to hide." "There were 6 of them." Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "We had to do something." "You shot one." "I shot one," she confirmed. He pulled back enough to look at her face. His expression was complex, anger and pride and fear all mixed together. You could have died. So could you. That's different. No, it isn't. She gripped his torn coat. You don't get to lock me away and protect me from everything. That's not how this works. Not anymore. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Then, incredibly, Adrian laughed. It was rough and short and sounded like it hurt, but it was real. You're right. That's not how this works. He touched her face, his hand gentle despite the violence still thrumming through him. You were incredible. Terrifying and incredible. I was terrified. You fought anyway. That's what courage looks like. Around them, the staff was emerging from hiding. Mrs. Thorne appeared with bandages and water. The injured attackers were being secured. Thomas was checking Peter, who'd taken a blow to the head but seemed coherent. How did you know to come back? Elara asked as Adrian let her go to help with the wounded. M sent a rider, said he'd been played. Someone sent a fake message to get me out of the house. I turned around the second I realized. He hauled one of the unconscious attackers onto a chair and bound his hands. Then I heard the shots from half a mile away and knew I was too late. You weren't too late. You were exactly on time. He looked at her, and something in his expression shifted, softened. We need to talk, after this is cleaned up, about everything. I know about the documents, she said. The courier told me, and I found your supply route, the lumber discrepancy. Adrian went very still. The courier? He's in the wine cellar. Thomas can show you. You caught him? I had help. That laugh again, stronger this time. You ran my household for 3 weeks and accidentally uncovered my enemy's surveillance network. Do you have any idea how remarkable that is? I was just trying to save money on lumber. You were being you, competent and stubborn and refusing to accept the world as you found it. He turned back to binding the prisoner, but there was a smile in his voice. I think I'm in serious trouble. What kind of trouble? The kind where I married you for protection and ended up with a partner instead. Is that so bad? He met her eyes. No, but it's definitely complicated. The constable arrived an hour later with 6 men in a wagon. By then, the attackers were secured, the wounded treated, and the house starting to look less like a battlefield. Adrian gave a brief, heavily edited account of what had happened. Bandits targeting the estate, fought off by the household. The constable seemed skeptical but didn't push. No one pushed the Duke of Blackridge. After the prisoners were loaded and taken away, after the staff had been sent to rest with extra pay and reassurances, after the broken windows had been temporarily boarded, Elara and Adrian finally found themselves alone in his study. She sat in the chair across from his desk, exhausted beyond measure. Her hands had finally stopped shaking, but her dress was ruined with powder burns and someone else's blood. Adrian poured 2 glasses of brandy and handed her one. Drink. You've earned it. She did. It burned going down, but steadied her. They were after the documents, he said, settling into his own chair with a wince that said he'd taken more damage than he'd admitted. The evidence I've been holding. Names of government officials who took bribes during the war. Generals who sold intelligence to the enemy. High-ranking lords who profited while soldiers died. Why keep it? Why not just release it? Because the moment I do, I'm a dead man. Right now, the documents are insurance. If anything happens to me, they get released. That keeps most people from trying anything too direct. He swirled his brandy. But someone got desperate or greedy, and they decided the risk was worth it. The man in the cellar said I made myself valuable, that I was worth interrogating. He's right. You found one of their supply routes. If you'd kept digging, you might have found others, might have traced them back to the source. His jaw tightened. I should have warned you, should have told you what to look for. You couldn't have known I'd stumble onto it. I should have known you'd stumble onto everything. You don't do anything halfway. Elara set down her glass. So what happens now? They'll just try again. No, now they know you'll fight back. That changes the calculation. He leaned forward. And more importantly, now I know I can trust you with the truth. All of it. I'm listening. Adrian stood and went to a bookshelf, pressing a hidden panel. It swung open to reveal a small safe. From it, he pulled a leather portfolio. The documents, he said, setting them on the desk between them. Names, dates, transactions. Enough to bring down 3 ministers, 2 generals, and at least a dozen lords. Elara stared at the portfolio like it might explode. And you've been keeping this in your study the whole time? Hidden in plain sight. They expected elaborate security, secret locations, so I kept it simple. He tapped the leather. But after tonight, simple isn't going to cut it anymore. They're escalating, which means we need to escalate too. What are you proposing? We go on the offensive, use your supply route discovery, trace it back, find out who's running their network and cut off the head. That's insane. That's survival. He met her eyes. I'm not asking you to do this with me. You've done enough. I can send you somewhere safe while I handle it. Where exactly do you think would be safe? If they found me here, they'll find me anywhere. She stood, moving around the desk to face him directly. You said it yourself. We're partners now, so stop trying to protect me from the consequences and let me help. You could die. I almost died tonight. At least this way, I'm choosing the fight. They stood inches apart, the portfolio between them like a declaration of war. This isn't what I wanted for you, Adrian said quietly. When I married you, I thought I could keep you separate from all this. Keep you safe in ignorance. I don't want safety. I want purpose. She picked up the portfolio, feeling its weight. And I want to stop the people who tried to burn down my house. Your house? My house. My staff. My responsibility. She met his gaze squarely. You made me the Duchess. Now deal with the consequences. Adrian's expression shifted through surprise, admiration, and something else she couldn't quite name. Then he smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his whole face. All right, Duchess. We do this together. Together, she agreed. He extended his hand. She shook it, and this time the grip lingered, warm and solid and real. They were in this now, truly in it. No more half measures or protective distance. Whatever came next, they'd face it as allies. The storm outside was finally breaking, dawn creeping pale through the windows. Elara looked at the documents in her hand, thought about the men in the wagon heading to the constable's lockup, about the household sleeping upstairs after surviving their first battle. She'd come to Blackridge Manor as a bride sold into darkness. Now she was something else entirely. A fighter. A partner. A threat to powerful men who'd thought they were untouchable. And she was just getting started. Adrian was putting the safe back in order when they heard it, a sharp crack, then shattering glass from the entrance hall. Both of them moved instantly, weapons drawn. They rushed downstairs to find a rock on the floor, wrapped in paper. Adrian picked it up carefully and unfolded the note. His face went white. What? Elara demanded. What does it say? He handed it to her without a word. The message was short. You took 6 of ours. We'll take everyone you love, starting tomorrow. Elara's blood turned to ice. Everyone they loved, the staff, Mrs. Thorne, Annie, Thomas, all the people who'd stood with her tonight. They're not going to stop, she whispered. No, Adrian agreed. They're not. He turned to her, and in his eyes she saw the same calculation she was making, the same terrible realization. They'd won the battle, but the war had just begun. And this time, the enemy wasn't coming for the Duke of Blackridge. They were coming for everyone he'd failed to protect from himself. If you or someone you know is having a difficult time, free support is available. They were coming for everyone he'd failed to protect from himself. The rock sat on Adrian's desk like an accusation. Dawnlight crept through the windows, turning the broken glass in the entrance hall into scattered diamonds. Neither of them had slept. Neither of them had moved from the study since reading that note. We can't wait for them to make the next move, Elara said finally, breaking the silence. Her voice was steady despite the exhaustion pulling at her bones. Every hour we spend reacting is an hour they spend planning. Adrian stood at the window, his back to her. I'm sending the staff away. Today. Anyone who wants to leave gets 3 months' wages and a reference. Anyone who stays does so knowing they're a target. They won't leave. They will if I order them to. Adrian. She waited until he turned to face her. These people fought beside me last night. Thomas, Robert, even Annie helped barricade the doors. They're not going to abandon the house just because you tell them to. Then they're fools. No, they're loyal. There's a difference. She moved to the desk, spreading out the documents he'd shown her earlier. But loyalty won't stop bullets. We need a plan, a real one, not just defense. Offense. He crossed to the desk, studying her face like he was seeing her for the first time. You should be demanding I send you away too. Instead, you're planning a counterattack. Why? Because I'm tired of being afraid, because those bastards threaten my household, and because… She stopped, surprised by the truth rising in her throat. Because you're my husband, and I don't leave people I care about to fight alone. The words hung between them, raw and unexpected. Adrian's expression flickered, shock, then something warmer. You care about me. Don't let it go to your head. Too late. He almost smiled, then sobered. The supply route you found, the lumber shipments. That's our opening. If we can trace where those excess orders were going, we find their staging point. Find their staging point, we find who's coordinating the attacks. And then what? We can't exactly storm their headquarters with 5 servants and a duchess who's had 3 weeks of weapons training. No, but we can do something better. He pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and started writing. We expose them, take the evidence of their supply network, combine it with the documents I'm holding, and we don't just release it. We deliver it directly to the people who can act on it. The right minister, the right general, someone clean who owes me a favor. You have someone like that? I have exactly one person like that, and he happens to be the king's personal investigator. Adrian kept writing, his hand steady. His name is Marcus Whitfield. We served together during the war. I saved his life in a skirmish outside Dover. He's owed me a debt for 5 years, and he's been waiting for me to call it in. Elara felt hope flicker for the first time since reading that note. He'd help us? If I can prove the corruption goes high enough and the evidence is solid, he'd have to help us. It's literally his job. Adrian set down the pen. But getting to London safely is the problem. They'll be watching the roads, expecting us to run or to hole up here. We need to do neither. Then what do? We bait them. He met her eyes. We let them think they're winning. The plan was insane, but it was also brilliant in its audacity. They would leak false information through the prisoner in the wine cellar, make him believe they were planning to flee to Adrian's estate in Scotland. Meanwhile, they'd actually be traveling to London in disguise, using back roads and trusted contacts to move undetected. Once in London, they'd deliver the evidence to Marcus Whitfield and let the Crown's justice do what Adrian's knife couldn't. It requires perfect timing, Adrian explained to the assembled household staff 2 hours later. The servants sat in the main hall, exhausted and wary. And it requires all of you to play your parts convincingly. Mrs. Thorne spoke up from her seat near the front. What parts would those be, Your Grace? You'll pack the household as if we're preparing for an extended journey. Trunks, supplies, everything visible to anyone watching the house. Make it obvious we're running. Meanwhile, Her Grace and I will slip out tonight through the old hunting tunnels that run under the east wing. The tunnels haven't been used in years, Robert said. They might have collapsed. I checked them this morning while you were all resting. They're intact. Adrian's gaze swept the room. I won't lie to you. This is dangerous. If they figure out we're gone before we reach London, they'll come back here looking for answers. Anyone who stays needs to be prepared to lie convincingly under pressure. And if we can't lie convincingly? Annie asked, her voice small. Then you leave now, with my blessing and enough money to start over somewhere safe. Silence. Then Thomas stood. I'm staying. They broke into our house, shot at our people. I don't run from that. I'm staying too, Robert added. His son Peter nodded beside him. One by one, the staff declared themselves in, even Annie, who looked terrified but resolute. Mrs. Thorne was the last to speak. This household has been dying for 3 years, Your Grace, ever since the late Duchess passed. But in 3 weeks, Her Grace brought it back to life. I'll not abandon it now. Adrian's jaw tightened with something that looked like emotion. Thank you, all of you. Elara stood. If we're doing this, we need to move fast. They said they're coming tomorrow, which means we have maybe 20 hours. Mrs. Thorne, start the packing. Make it obvious but not too rushed. We're wealthy nobles preparing to travel, not panicking rabbits. Thomas, Robert, I need you to visit the village. Spread rumors that the Duke and Duchess are planning to leave for Scotland within the week. And the prisoner? Thomas asked. Adrian smiled, and it wasn't kind. I'll handle him personally. The prisoner's name, they learned, was William Cross. He'd cracked after 2 hours of Adrian's questioning, not through violence, but through the simple expedient of offering him a deal: immunity in exchange for information. "They're operating out of a warehouse near the London docks," Cross said, his voice hoarse. "3 men running the network. They work for Lord Edmund Ashford." Elara felt her blood freeze. "Ashford? The man who came to dinner?" "The very same. He's been funding anti-crown activities for years, skimming money from his own shipping business to pay for it. Your husband's documents prove it. If they ever came to light, Ashford would hang. So he sent you to kill us, to capture you. The plan was to take her Grace, use her as leverage to get the Duke to turn over the documents, then kill you both and make it look like an accident." Cross looked at Adrian with something like respect. "You were supposed to be an easy target, a war veteran gone soft in retirement. They didn't know you'd married someone who'd fight back." "They should have done better research," Elara said coldly. Adrian leaned forward. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell your contacts that you escaped, that you overheard the Duke and Duchess planning to flee to Scotland. You're going to send them north while we go south. And if I refuse? Then I'll let the constable know you were part of a plot to kill a peer of the realm. That's a hanging offense, Mr. Cross. Or you can take the deal, walk away with your life, and never set foot in England again." Cross swallowed hard. "What guarantee do I have you'll keep your word?" "None. But it's better odds than you'll get anywhere else." After a long moment, Cross nodded. "I'll do it." They released him that afternoon with enough money to book passage to France and a very clear understanding that if he ever came back, Adrian would find him. Cross limped away from the manor, looking grateful to be alive. "You think he'll actually do it?" Elara asked as they watched him disappear down the road. "He's a survivor. Survivors know when to cut their losses." Adrian turned away from the window. "Besides, even if he warns them we're on to their plan, it doesn't matter. By the time they figure out we're not going to Scotland, we'll already be in London with Marcus. And if Marcus doesn't believe us, then we're out of options, and I start using the knife more liberally." He said it like he was discussing the weather. Elara should have been horrified. Instead, she found it oddly comforting. They spent the afternoon preparing. Elara changed into traveling clothes, practical, dark, nothing that screamed Duchess. Adrian did the same, adding weapons to places she hadn't known weapons could be hidden. 2 pistols, 3 knives, and something he called a garrote that made her stomach turn when he explained how it worked. "You won't need to use any of this," he assured her as he helped her strap a knife to her thigh. "But better to have it and not need it. You're just full of comfort today. I'm trying to keep you alive. Comfort is secondary." His hands lingered on her leg a moment longer than necessary. Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. "Adrian." A knock at the door interrupted whatever she'd been about to say. Mrs. Thorne entered with a bundle. "Food for the journey, Your Grace. And these." She held out 2 worn traveling cloaks. "They belong to my parents, common folk. No one will look twice at you wearing them." "Thank you, Mrs. Thorne." Elara took the cloaks, touched by the gesture. "For everything." The housekeeper's expression softened. "You've given us something to fight for again. That's worth more than you know." After she left, Adrian finished checking their supplies in silence. Finally, he spoke without looking up. "When this is over, if we survive, I'm going to tell you everything about Catherine, about the war, about why I am the way I am. You don't have to. I want to." He met her eyes. "You deserve to know who you married, the real version, not the ghost everyone sees." "I think I'm starting to figure it out anyway." "Probably. You're inconveniently perceptive." He offered his hand. "Ready?" She took it. "Ready." The tunnels were worse than Elara had imagined. Centuries old, carved through solid rock, they stretched from the east wing cellars to an exit nearly half a mile from the house. The air was thick with damp and the smell of earth. Their lantern cast jumping shadows on the walls. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness ahead. "Watch your step," Adrian warned as the floor became uneven. "The stones are slick." They walked in silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes. Elara's legs ached from the crouching required in the lower sections. Her shoulders brushed the walls, tight enough that she had to fight rising panic. "Almost there," Adrian said, as if sensing her distress. "The exit is just ahead." The tunnel opened into a small chamber with a rusted iron door. Adrian put his shoulder against it, and it groaned open reluctantly. Fresh air flooded in, sweet and cold. They emerged in a thicket of trees a safe distance from the manor. Behind them, they could see lights in the windows. Mrs. Thorne and the staff playing their parts perfectly, making it look like the household was still fully occupied. "The horses are this way," Adrian said, leading her deeper into the woods. They found 2 mounts tethered to a tree, courtesy of Robert, who'd placed them earlier. Not the fine horses from Adrian's stable, but sturdy working animals that wouldn't draw attention. They rode through the night, taking deer paths and forgotten roads that Adrian seemed to know by instinct. Twice they heard other riders and had to hide in the brush, hearts hammering, until the danger passed. Dawn found them at a coaching inn 20 miles south of the manor. Adrian paid for a room, and they collapsed onto the single bed, too exhausted to care about propriety. 4 hours, Adrian mumbled, already half asleep. Then we keep moving. Elara meant to stay awake, to keep watch. But exhaustion claimed her within minutes. She woke to Adrian's hand on her shoulder and sunlight streaming through the window. Time to move. They ate quickly. Bread and cheese from their packs, then mounted again. The roads became busier as they approached London. Merchants, farmers, travelers of all kinds. They blended into the flow of traffic, just 2 more common folk heading to the city. It took another full day of riding before London's sprawl appeared on the horizon. "Marcus lives in Clerkenwell," Adrian explained as they navigated the increasingly crowded streets. "Used to be a rough area, but he's cleaned it up. Fitting, considering his profession." They found the house as evening fell, a modest townhouse with neat shutters and a well-maintained front garden. Adrian knocked 3 times in a specific pattern. The door opened to reveal a man in his 40s, lean and sharp-eyed with graying hair. He looked at Adrian, then at Elara, and his expression shifted from wariness to surprise. "Blackridge? What the hell are you doing here?" Calling in that favor Marcus, Adrian pushed past him into the house. "And we need to talk, now." Marcus Whitfield's study was exactly what Elara expected. Organized, efficient, with maps of London pinned to every wall. He poured 3 glasses of whiskey and settled behind his desk with the wary air of a man expecting trouble. "Start talking," he said. Adrian laid out everything, the documents, the attempts on their lives, Ashford's involvement, the supply network Elara had uncovered. He held nothing back. When he finished, Marcus was silent for a long moment. "You're telling me that Lord Edmund Ashford, peer of the realm, confidant of ministers, is running a criminal network and funding sedition? I'm telling you I can prove it." Adrian pulled out the documents and spread them on the desk. "Everything's here. Financial records, correspondence, witness statements. Enough to hang him 3 times over." Marcus studied the papers, his expression growing darker with each page he read. If this is legitimate, this is massive. It doesn't just implicate Ashford. There are names here." He tapped one document. "This is the Minister of Trade, and this, the Lord Chancellor's private secretary." "I know. That's why I've been holding it. Release it wrong, and I'm dead before the ink dries." "But now they've forced your hand." Marcus looked at Elara. "And you must be the Duchess, the one who survived 6 armed men with a household staff. News travels fast. I make it my business to know things." He turned back to Adrian. "If I take this to the king, there will be arrests, trials. Ashford will know it was you." "He already knows. That's why he tried to kill us." "Fair point." Marcus gathered the documents carefully. "I'll need to verify some of this, cross-reference it with what we already have in the royal archives. But if even half of it checks out, Ashford is finished." "How long?" "Give me 3 days. I'll move quietly, build the case properly. Then we'll strike all at once, arrests, seizures, the whole apparatus." He met Adrian's eyes. "But you two need to stay hidden until then. If Ashford gets wind that you're in London, he'll escalate." "We have a safe house in Southwark," Adrian said. "No one knows about it." "Good. Stay there. Don't contact anyone. I'll send word when it's done." Marcus stood and extended his hand. "You're calling in that favor at the worst possible time, but I owe you my life. Consider the debt paid." They shook. Then Marcus turned to Elara. "Your Grace, I served with your husband during the siege of Calais. I watched him hold a position against 30 men with nothing but a broken sword and sheer bloody-mindedness. He's the stubbornest bastard I've ever met." He smiled slightly. "Seems he married his match." "I'm beginning to think so," Elara agreed. The safe house was a narrow building squeezed between a tavern and a boarding house in one of Southwark's less reputable streets. Inside, it was sparse but clean. 2 rooms, a small kitchen, basics enough for a short stay. "I used to use this during the war," Adrian explained as he locked the door behind them, "when I needed to be in London but couldn't risk staying somewhere official." "You have more secrets than I thought possible." "I'm a very secretive person, haven't you noticed?" Despite everything, she laughed. The sound felt good, human, real. They spent the evening planning their next moves, eating cold meat and bread from the market, talking quietly about what would happen after Marcus made his arrests, about whether they'd be safe to return to the manor, about how to rebuild what had been broken. "The staff will need reassurance," Elara said, seated cross-legged on the floor with a map spread before her, "and compensation for the danger they faced. Mrs. Thorne especially. She held everything together." "Agreed. And we'll need to reinforce security. What happened can't happen again." Adrian sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "But that's assuming we survive the next 3 days." Always such an optimist. "It's one of my best qualities." She turned to look at him, and in the candlelight his features were softer than usual, less guarded. "Why did you really marry me?" she asked quietly. "Not the political reasons, not the protection. The real reason you chose me specifically." He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Your father came to me with the proposal, showed me your portrait, told me you were docile and biddable. Everything I'd need in a wife who wouldn't ask questions. I almost said no immediately because I didn't want another Catherine, another woman who'd wither under the weight of my reputation. But then I met you. Just once, at a garden party your father forced you to attend. You probably don't remember. I was just another face in the crowd. But I watched you spend an entire afternoon deflecting marriage proposals from men 3 times your age with such polite viciousness that I was impressed despite myself." Elara did remember that party. Remembered being miserable and angry and sharp-tongued because she'd known her father was shopping her around like merchandise. "I was horrible that day. You were magnificent. And I thought, if I have to marry someone for this scheme to work, let it be someone who won't break. Someone strong enough to survive being connected to me." He met her eyes. "I didn't expect you to be this strong, or this brave, or this damned stubborn. Is that a complaint?" "No." His hand found hers in the dim light. "It's the opposite of a complaint." They sat like that, hands linked, and Elara felt something shift between them. The partnership they'd forged in desperation was becoming something else, something neither of them had planned for, something that felt dangerously like trust. "When this is over," she said softly, "I want you to take me to wherever Catherine is buried. I want to pay my respects properly." Adrian's grip tightened. "Why?" "Because she deserves it, and because I need to understand what she went through to make sure I never make her mistakes." "You couldn't make her mistakes if you tried. You're nothing like her." "I know. But she was your wife once. That matters." He pulled her closer, and she went willingly, resting her head against his shoulder. They stayed that way until the candle burned low and exhaustion claimed them both. The next 2 days crawled by with agonizing slowness. They didn't leave the safe house except for necessary supplies. Adrian drilled her on defensive techniques until her muscles screamed. They reviewed the documents again and again, finding new connections, building their case stronger. And they talked. About the war. About Catherine's death. About Elara's childhood and her father's gambling debts. About the future they might have if they survived. On the 3rd day, a knock came at the door. Adrian was at the window instantly, hand on his pistol. "Stay back." But the voice that called through the door was familiar. "Blackridge, it's Marcus. I have news." Adrian opened the door cautiously. Marcus entered quickly, his face grim. "It's done. We arrested Ashford 2 hours ago, along with 14 others. The evidence was irrefutable. The king himself signed the warrants." He pulled out an official-looking document. "This is for you. A royal pardon for any involvement in holding classified documents. You're officially clear. Elara felt her knees go weak with relief. It's over? The immediate threat is over. Ashford will hang. His network is dismantled. But Marcus hesitated. You should know that during the interrogation, Ashford made some interesting claims. About you, Your Grace. What kind of claims? Adrian's voice went cold. That you weren't a war hero, that you were a deserter who fled the front lines and used blackmail to build your reputation. Marcus held up a hand. Obviously lies, desperate attempts to deflect. But he said them publicly. The rumors will spread. Let them spread, Elara said firmly. We know the truth. That's enough. Adrian looked at her, surprise flickering across his face. Then he turned back to Marcus. Thank you for everything. We're even now. Marcus headed for the door, then paused. One more thing. The Minister of War wants to see you. He has questions about how you acquired those documents in the first place. I'll bet he does. Be careful, Blackridge. You've made powerful friends today, but you've also reminded powerful people what happens when they cross you. That's a dangerous position to be in. After Marcus left, Elara and Adrian stood in the small room, the weight of victory settling over them. We did it, she said softly. You did it. You're the one who found the supply route. Without that, we'd have nothing. We did it together. She took his hands. Partners, remember? He pulled her close, and this time when he kissed her, it wasn't cold or performative. It was real, urgent, and fierce, and full of everything they'd survived together. When they finally broke apart, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. I think I need to tell you something. What? I'm falling in love with you. I didn't mean to, didn't plan for it, but somewhere between you defying me at breakfast and you shooting an armed attacker, it happened. Elara's heart stuttered. That's inconvenient. Extremely inconvenient. Because I'm falling in love with you too, and I have no idea what to do about it. He laughed. That genuine, startled laugh she'd come to treasure. I suppose we'll figure it out together. We seem to be good at that. We are, aren't we? They packed their few belongings and prepared to return to the manor. The journey back would be safer now, with Ashford's network dismantled. But the real work was just beginning, rebuilding their household, their reputation, their marriage into something that could last. As they rode out of London, Elara looked back at the city where they'd won their first real victory. Not just against Ashford, but against the isolation and fear that had defined both their lives. She'd been sold into this marriage like property. Now she was claiming it as her own. And the Duke of Blackridge, who'd thought he could keep her at arm's length, had found himself with a partner who refused to be kept anywhere she didn't choose to be. The manor appeared on the horizon 3 days later, and Elara felt something unexpected. Relief. This cold stone fortress had become home. The staff was waiting when they rode up, Mrs. Thorne and Thomas and all the others anxious and watchful. When they saw Adrian and Elara dismount, alive and whole, a cheer went up. You did it! Annie rushed forward. We heard the news in the village. Lord Ashford arrested for treason. We did it together, Elara corrected, embracing the girl. All of us. Mrs. Thorne approached more sedately, but there was warmth in her eyes. Welcome home, Your Grace, both of you. It's good to be home, Adrian said, and he meant it. That evening, they gathered the household in the main hall. Adrian stood beside Elara, and for the first time since she'd arrived, they looked like true partners. What we face together has changed this household, Adrian began. You all risked your lives for us, for this place. That kind of loyalty deserves recognition. He detailed the bonuses he was distributing, the security improvements he was implementing, the new positions he was creating to properly staff the manor. But it was Elara who added the final piece. This house was dying, she said clearly, but you brought it back to life. Your courage, your dedication, your refusal to abandon your posts when it would have been easier to run. I came here as a stranger, but you've made me family. And I want you to know that as long as I'm Duchess of Blackridge, this will be a household worth fighting for. The applause was genuine and long. Later, alone in Adrian's study, their study now, he'd insisted, they reviewed the final letters from Marcus. The trials would begin in a month. Their testimony would be needed, but the outcome was all but certain. We won, Adrian said, still sounding surprised by it. We survived, Elara corrected. Winning comes next. And what does winning look like to you? She thought about it. A household that thrives. A marriage built on truth instead of transaction. A life where I'm not just surviving but actually living. She met his eyes. What about you? All of that. And you beside me, driving me insane with your stubbornness. I can arrange that. I'm counting on it. He kissed her again, and this time there was no urgency, no desperation. Just certainty. Just choice. They'd been forced into this marriage by circumstance and desperation. But what they were building now, that was all theirs. And as Elara looked around the study, at the documents they'd used to bring down their enemies, at the man who'd become her true partner, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. The war wasn't over. There would be more enemies, more challenges, more fights ahead. But for the first time since that cold night when she'd been sold into darkness, Elara Blackridge wasn't afraid of what came next. She was ready for it. She was ready for it. The trials began 6 weeks later in London's grandest courtroom, and Elara insisted on attending every single day. You don't have to do this, Adrian said as their carriage rattled toward the courthouse on the first morning. Your testimony was given in private depositions. You could stay at the townhouse. And miss watching Ashford squirm? Elara adjusted her gloves, her jaw set. Not a chance? The courtroom was packed. Lords and ladies eager for scandal, journalists scribbling furiously, commoners who'd managed to squeeze into the public gallery. When Elara and Adrian entered, a hush fell over the crowd. They'd become famous in the weeks since Ashford's arrest, the Duke and Duchess who'd taken down a conspiracy. Some of the attention was admiring, much of it was hostile. Elara kept her head high and ignored it all. Lord Edmund Ashford sat in the defendant's box looking smaller than she remembered. His fine clothes couldn't hide the man underneath, cornered, desperate, already marked by defeat. When his eyes found hers across the courtroom, she didn't look away, didn't flinch. Let him see what refusing to break looked like. The prosecutor rose, a sharp-faced man named Edmund Carlyle, who'd built his reputation on destroying the powerful. My lord, if it pleases the court, the Crown calls its first witness, His Grace, Adrian Blackridge, Duke of Blackridge. Adrian squeezed Elara's hand once, then walked to the witness stand with the same controlled precision he brought to everything. The questioning was methodical and brutal. Carlyle walked Adrian through every document, every transaction, every piece of evidence they'd compiled. Adrian's voice never wavered. He recited facts like a soldier giving a report, clear, precise, damning. Ashford's barrister tried to rattle him during cross-examination. Is it not true, Your Grace, that you acquired these documents through illegal means during the war? I acquired them through military intelligence operations authorized by the Crown. If you'd like to question those authorizations, I suggest you take it up with the Minister of War. And is it not true that you held these documents for 3 years without reporting them to proper authorities? I held them because releasing them prematurely would have put lives at risk, including my own. How convenient for you. Adrian's smile was cold. If you're suggesting I fabricated evidence against Lord Ashford, I'd invite you to explain how I managed to forge his handwriting, his private seal, and his personal financial records. I'm many things, Counselor, but I'm not a miracle worker. Laughter rippled through the gallery. The barrister retreated, visibly frustrated. When Adrian returned to his seat beside Elara, she whispered, You enjoyed that. Immensely. The trial stretched over 2 weeks. Witness after witness took the stand. Clerks who'd processed Ashford's transactions, soldiers who'd noticed suspicious supply shipments, the men who'd attacked the manor and cut deals to testify. Each piece of testimony built an unassailable wall of evidence. But it was the 8th day that changed everything. Carlyle called a surprise witness, a young woman named Margaret Price, dressed in mourning black. Miss Price, Carlyle began gently, please tell the court your relationship to the defendant. He was my employer, sir. I worked as a housemaid in his London residence for 3 years. And did you ever witness anything unusual during your employment? Margaret's hands twisted in her lap. Yes, sir. I witnessed Lord Ashford meeting with men in secret. They'd come late at night, use the servants' entrance. He'd send all the staff away except me. Said I was too stupid to understand what I was hearing. And what did you hear, Miss Price? I heard them planning attacks against people who threatened them. I heard Lord Ashford say— She swallowed hard. I heard him say that the Duke of Blackridge needed to be eliminated, and if that meant going through his wife, so be it. The courtroom erupted. The judge hammered for order. Ashford's barrister shot to his feet. Objection! This witness's testimony is hearsay. I have corroborating evidence, my lord. Carlyle produced a letter. Written by Lord Ashford to one of his conspirators, explicitly ordering the attack on Blackridge Manor. Miss Price helped us locate it hidden in his study. Elara felt Adrian go rigid beside her. This was new information. Carlyle hadn't told them about Margaret Price. Why did you wait so long to come forward? The judge asked the girl. Because I was afraid, my lord. Lord Ashford said anyone who betrayed him would end up like his first wife. Margaret's voice broke. She died in a fire that was ruled an accident, but I saw him coming home that night with soot on his clothes. And I knew. The courtroom went deadly silent. Ashford stood up in the dock, face purple with rage. This is a lie. She's a liar and a— Sit down, Lord Ashford, the judge commanded, or I'll have you removed from your own trial. The trial concluded 3 days later with a verdict that surprised no one. Guilty on all counts. Treason, conspiracy, attempted murder, fraud. The list went on. The sentence was death by hanging. As the guards led Ashford away, he looked directly at Elara and Adrian. His expression held pure hatred. You've won nothing, he spat. They'll come for you again, all of them. You can't kill them all. No, Adrian agreed quietly, but I can make them afraid to try. Outside the courthouse, journalists swarmed them. Elara had prepared for this, had practiced her statements with Adrian until they were perfect. Your Grace, is it true you fought off the attackers yourself? I had help, she said clearly, from my household staff who showed more courage than most lords I've met. And the rumors that His Grace was a deserter during the war are exactly that, rumors, spread by desperate men trying to destroy a reputation they couldn't match. What's next for the Duke and Duchess of Blackridge? Elara looked at Adrian, who nodded slightly. They'd discussed this too. We're returning home, she said, to rebuild what was damaged and to make sure nothing like this ever happens again. Blackridge Manor will be a place of strength, not secrets. The journalist ate it up. The carriage ride back to their London townhouse was quiet. Both of them were exhausted from weeks of testimony, tension, and public scrutiny. Margaret Price was brave, Elara said finally, coming forward like that. She was. Carlyle told me afterward that she approached him 3 weeks ago, wanted to make sure Ashford hanged for what he'd done. Adrian stared out the window. She lost her position because of it. Ashford's allies made sure she'd never work in a noble house again. Then we'll hire her. He looked at her surprised. What? We need more staff anyway, and I'd rather have someone with courage than someone with references. Elara met his eyes. Unless you object? I don't object. I'm just constantly surprised by you. Good. Keeps you on your toes. They spent another week in London tying up loose ends. The Minister of War formally thanked Adrian for his service and quietly suggested that any remaining classified documents be turned over to the Crown. Adrian complied. He'd gotten what he needed from them anyway. Marcus Whitfield invited them to dinner and spent the evening regaling Elara with stories about Adrian during the war that made her husband blush. He once held a bridge for 6 hours with nothing but a pistol and sheer stubbornness, Marcus said over dessert. The enemy had rifles, grenades, superior numbers. Didn't matter. Adrian just kept shooting until reinforcements arrived. That sounds familiar, Elara said, smiling at Adrian. Stubbornness seems to be a theme. It served me well, Adrian muttered. It's kept you alive, Marcus corrected. Though I'll admit, I didn't think you'd ever find someone who could match you for it. Clearly I was wrong. The compliment warmed Elara more than she expected. They returned to Blackridge Manor on a cold autumn morning to find the household transformed. Mrs. Thorne had used their absence to implement every improvement Elara had suggested. New staff, better systems, proper security measures. The house gleamed. Welcome home, Your Graces, Mrs. Thorne said formally, but there was warmth in her eyes now. Pride. It looks beautiful, Elara said honestly. You've outdone yourself. I had excellent instructions to work from. That evening, Elara and Adrian stood in his study, their study, and reviewed the state of things. The manor was secure, the household thriving, their enemies either hanged or scattered to the winds. We should celebrate, Adrian said, pouring 2 glasses of wine. What did you have in mind? Actually, he set down the glasses and pulled a small box from his desk drawer. I got you something. In London, before the trial started. Elara took the box, curious. Inside was a ring, not the plain gold band he'd given her at their wedding, but something new. Emeralds set in silver, beautiful and bold. I thought you deserved something you actually chose to wear, Adrian said quietly. Not something forced on you by circumstance. She slipped it onto her finger beside the wedding band. It fit perfectly. It's beautiful, thank you. There's an inscription inside. She tilted it to the light and read, For the storm I married. Tears pricked her eyes. Adrian, I mean it. You're not the docile wife I thought I was getting. You're a force of nature, and I... He took her hands. I love you. Completely. Not just because you're brave or clever or stubborn, but because you chose to stand beside me when you could have run. That means everything. I love you too, she said, the words coming easily now. Even though you're impossible and secretive and you still think you need to protect me from everything. I'm working on that last part. Work faster. He laughed and pulled her close, and they stayed that way until the wine was forgotten and the fire burned down to embers. The months that followed brought changes neither of them had anticipated. The trial had made them famous, or infamous, depending on who was asked. Invitations flooded in from lords and ladies who wanted to curry favor or simply gawk at the couple who'd toppled a conspiracy. Elara declined most of them, accepting only those that served a purpose. She was building something. Not just a household, but a network. She befriended the wives of minor lords, the daughters of wealthier merchants, women who had influence but no official power. She shared what she'd learned about household management, about recognizing corruption in supply chains, about building loyalty among staff. You're creating a movement, Adrian observed one evening as she reviewed correspondence from 3 different duchesses asking for advice. I'm creating change, Elara corrected. Women have been managing households for centuries while men pretend it's trivial work. But it's not trivial. It's where real power lives, in knowing how things actually function, where money goes, who's loyal, and who's not. You're dangerous. I learned from the best. He kissed her temple. I'm proud of you. Good. Because I'm not done yet. 6 months after Ashford's execution, Elara organized a gathering at Blackridge Manor. She called it a symposium on household management, which made it sound boring enough that no one objected. In reality, it was the first meeting of what would become known as the Duchesses' Alliance, a network of noble women sharing information, resources, and support. 23 women attended that first meeting. Within a year, there would be over 100. They discussed everything from managing estates to identifying financial fraud. Elara shared what she'd learned about supply chains and surveillance networks. Other women contributed their own knowledge about navigating politics, about protecting themselves legally, about building influence in a world that tried to keep them powerless. This is remarkable, Lady Catherine Pemberton said during a break. She was the young wife of an elderly earl and had confided that she felt trapped. I've never been in a room where women talked about these things openly. Why shouldn't we? Elara replied. Men talk about business and politics all the time. We're just doing the same thing. Yes, but we're actually good at it, Catherine said with a grin. The gatherings became regular. Quarterly at first, then monthly. Women began bringing problems to the alliance, abusive husbands, financial exploitation, threats from corrupt officials. And the alliance solved them, quietly and effectively, using the collective power of their positions. Adrian watched it all with a mixture of amusement and awe. You've built an army, he told Elara one night after the 3rd symposium. I've built a family, she corrected. A family that looks out for each other. Same thing, really. Meanwhile, Adrian's own reputation was transforming. The deserter rumors had been thoroughly debunked, replaced by stories of his courage during the war, and his integrity in exposing corruption. The Minister of War offered him a position as a military advisor to the crown. He accepted on one condition, that he could work from Blackridge Manor most of the time. "I'm not leaving Elara to manage everything alone, Toss," he told the minister. "We're partners." The word had become his favorite. A year after the trial, Elara stood at the window of their bedroom, their shared bedroom now, the separate chambers abandoned months ago, and watched spring unfold across the grounds. The gardens were being restored under her direction. New staff laughed in the courtyard. The house hummed with life. Adrian came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About the girl who arrived here terrified and angry. She feels like someone else now." "She is someone else. She became you." Elara leaned back against him. "Do you ever regret it, marrying me?" "Every day." She elbowed him. "Liar." "All right, not every day. Just the days when you're being particularly stubborn." He turned her to face him. "The truth? I regret that it took me so long to see what I had. I wasted months trying to keep you at a distance when I should have been pulling you closer. We both wasted time. I spent weeks convinced you were a monster." "Fair assessment, honestly. You're not, though. You're just complicated." "I'll take complicated over monster." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the world they'd built together. "There's something I need to tell you," Elara said finally. Adrian tensed. "Should I be worried?" "That depends. How do you feel about children?" He went very still. "Elara, I saw the physician in the village yesterday. She confirmed it. We're going to have a baby." For a long moment, Adrian just stared at her. Then his face broke into the widest smile she'd ever seen. "We're having a baby," he repeated, like he couldn't quite believe it. "In about 7 months, yes." He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. When he set her down, his eyes were wet. "I never thought, after Catherine, after everything, I never thought I'd have this." "Well, you do. We do." She touched his face. "Are you happy?" "I'm terrified and ecstatic and completely unprepared, which I think is the definition of happy. Yes." They spent the rest of the evening making plans, preparing the nursery, discussing names, arguing about whether to tell the household immediately or wait. "Mrs. Thorne will know anyway," Elara pointed out. "That woman sees everything." "True. She probably knew before you did." The pregnancy was announced the following week, and the household erupted in celebration. Annie cried happy tears. Thomas immediately began building a cradle. Mrs. Thorne started planning with the efficiency of a general preparing for war. Letters poured in from the Duchess's alliance. Congratulations, advice, offers of support. Lady Catherine Pemberton sent a handmade blanket. Others sent books, clothes, gifts of every kind. "You've built something real," Adrian said, reading through the letters with Elara. "This network you've created, it's going to outlast both of us." "That's the idea. Women helping women. No one gets left behind." As her pregnancy progressed, Elara continued her work with the alliance but scaled back the physical training Adrian had been putting her through. "I'm pregnant, not broken," she protested when he tried to stop their morning sessions entirely. "You're carrying my child. I'm allowed to be overprotective. You're allowed to be reasonable. Overprotective is negotiable." They compromised. Lighter exercises, more focus on strategy and planning than physical combat. But Elara still insisted on learning, still insisted on being prepared. "The world doesn't get safer just because I'm having a baby," she pointed out. "If anything, I need to be better prepared." Adrian couldn't argue with that logic. The baby arrived on a crisp October morning, 7 months after the pregnancy announcement. The labor was long and difficult. 14 hours that left Elara exhausted and Adrian pacing holes in the corridor carpet. But when the physician finally emerged with a squalling infant wrapped in blankets, everything else fell away. "Your Grace, you have a daughter." A daughter, healthy, loud, perfect. Adrian held her with the careful reverence of a man holding something infinitely precious and infinitely fragile. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "She's wrinkly and angry," Elara said from the bed, exhausted but smiling. "Like her father." I am not wrinkly. Debatable. They named her Catherine Margaret, Catherine for the first Duchess, who deserved to be remembered with honor, and Margaret for the brave housemaid who'd helped bring down Ashford. The christening 3 weeks later was a massive affair. The Duchess's alliance attended in force. Marcus Whitfield came from London. Even the Minister of War made an appearance, bearing a ridiculously expensive silver rattle. But it was Mrs. Thorne's gift that made Elara cry. A hand-stitched blanket incorporating fabric from both Elara's wedding dress and the cloak Mrs. Thorne's mother had given them for their escape to London. "So she'll always know where she came from," Mrs. Thorne said quietly, "and what her parents survived to give her a future." That night, after the guests had departed and baby Catherine was asleep in her nursery, Elara and Adrian sat together in their study. "A year and a half ago, I arrived here thinking my life was over," Elara said softly. "Now I have a daughter, a household that's thriving, a network of women changing the world quietly, and a husband who actually loves me." "Funny how things work out," Adrian agreed. He was holding her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I married you to create a cover for my war against corruption. Instead, I found a partner who wages her own wars in her own way. Are you complaining?" "I'm celebrating." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn. "What's next for us?" Elara asked eventually. "We've defeated our enemies, built our household, started our family. What comes after all that?" Adrian considered. "We keep going, keep building, keep fighting for the world we want Catherine to inherit." He looked at her seriously. "And we teach her everything we know. How to fight, how to think, how to refuse to break no matter what the world throws at her." "We'll make her dangerous," Elara said with a smile. "Exactly. Just like her mother." The months turned to years. Catherine grew into a fierce, clever child who had her mother's stubbornness and her father's strategic mind. The Duchess's alliance expanded to include over 300 women across England. Adrian's position as royal military advisor gave him influence he used carefully to reform corrupt systems from within. And Blackridge Manor, once cold and forbidding, became something else entirely. A center of power, a sanctuary, a place where people came not to hide, but to learn how to fight. On Catherine's 5th birthday, Elara stood on the manor steps watching her daughter chase Thomas's grandchildren through the gardens. The old groundskeeper had retired 2 years ago, but he still visited regularly to dote on the young Duchess-to-be. Adrian joined her, slipping an arm around her waist in the familiar gesture that had become their habit. "She's going to be a handful," he observed as Catherine organized the other children into some kind of military formation. "She gets that from you. She gets that from both of us." "Fair point." "I've been thinking," Elara said, "about expanding the alliance, making it official, with chapters in other countries, formal structures, real political influence." "That's ambitious." "I learned from an ambitious man." Adrian kissed her temple. "Do it. I'll help however I can." That night, after Catherine was asleep and the household quiet, they stood together in the study that had become the center of their partnership. The room where they'd planned attacks and defense, where they'd built strategies and solved problems, where they'd transformed a forced marriage into something real. "Do you ever think about that first night?" Elara asked. "When you came to my room with a knife?" "Constantly. It was the stupidest thing I've ever done." "It was the bravest thing you've ever done, testing to see if I'd break, trusting that I wouldn't." "I didn't trust anything back then. I was just desperate and angry and looking for any excuse to believe things could be different." "And were they different?" He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his chest, hearing his heartbeat steady and strong. "Everything's different," he said quietly. "I was a ghost in my own house, walking through rooms but not living in them, surviving but not thriving. And then you came along and refused to let me stay that way. You did the same for me. I was drowning in my father's debts and my own powerlessness. You gave me the tools to fight back. We saved each other. We did." They stood that way for a long time, two people who'd been sold into darkness and chosen to create light instead. The manor around them hummed with life, servants moving through their evening routines, Catherine's soft breathing from the nursery, the distant sounds of the village beyond their gates. This was power, Elara thought. Not the kind that came from titles or wealth or fear. The kind that came from building something real, from refusing to break, from turning a transaction into a partnership and a partnership into a legacy. She'd been sold as property. She'd become a force. And she was just getting started. Years later, when scholars studied the quiet revolution that transformed women's influence in England, they would point to the Duchess's alliance as the beginning, to Elara Blackridge as the architect. But Elara knew the truth. It had started with a knife at her throat, and the choice to meet fear with defiance. It had started with a man carved from ice and a woman forged in fire, and the marriage that should have destroyed them both, but instead made them unbreakable. It had started with a single word, partners. And it would echo through generations, long after they were gone. But that was the future. Tonight, Elara Blackridge stood in her study beside her husband, her daughter asleep upstairs, her household thriving around her, and felt something she'd never expected to feel in this cold stone fortress. Complete. The storm she'd walked into had become the storm she commanded, and she would never, ever let it fade.